Welcome to Property Question Time. This is the programme where you can have your property related questions answered by our team of experts. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me today are Paul Mahoney, MD of Nova Financial Group. Welcome, Paul. Ayesha Ofori, founder of Propel, accomplished property investors and developers. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
And John Howard, property developer, author, and of course investor angel on our programme Property Elevator.
I sound like I've been busy. Hello.
Sounds like you have, John, but welcome back anyway. Paul, we're going to go to you first. I'm looking to set up a venture with my wife of buying large properties and splitting them into 2 or 3 flats for resale. Perhaps 3-storey Georgian townhouses into 3 apartments. We'd appreciate some guidance on how to finance these deals and the necessary conversion work. Also, how should we structure it if this is a business? Well, okay. I know that's music to your ears. You want to hear it's a business.
Yeah, well, it's good they've described it in that way. So far as answering all of those questions in depth, we're going to have to extend this show by about 5 hours. But give a very brief. So the 3 points they mentioned there, so far as financing them, structuring. What was the other one?
What
the works involved.
How to finance the works involved okay. As well as the purchase. Yeah.
So there's a number of different ways it can be financed. Generally, what people do when they're looking to buy a property to do works to it, to convert it, is either use development finance or short-term finance, being bridging. Now that would, that's in a way determined by both price and experience. It seems that they're just starting out in doing this, as a business. So they'll probably get the higher rates to start off with because they don't have much experience. Development finance is usually for a period of 12 months plus, whereas bridging or short-term finance is usually for a period of less than 12 months. So that will be, I suppose, in a way determined by how long they expect these works to take. They'd obviously need, unless they do have experience in the works themselves, or at least managing the works, they need to speak with someone who does have experience in that and get their advice on each and every project they're considering or each and every deal they're thinking of doing, to give them a clear understanding of those things. And always overestimate them, and sort of don't get caught up in your own hubris, I suppose. A lot of people become their own worst enemy by thinking they can do things a lot better than how it actually ends up.
Well, I think it's a clever person, isn't it, that knows what their limitations are, and I think property development's an ideal ground for that.
Definitely.
But Paul, I wonder if you would just, for the benefit of our viewers, not understanding perhaps some of the more technical terms you're using, could you just briefly explain the difference between development finance and bridging finance?
Yeah, so in short, development finance is as it says on the tin, it's for developments, but usually it's for a period of 12 months plus. And usually it's targeted at people that consider themselves developers, people with experience, I suppose.
So it'd be for the life of the development under construction? For
the life of the development, ideally. A lot of developers, as I say, under-account for time and then need to use short-term finance to top themselves up. But ideally, they would get it for the period for which they see the project progressing. And usually that would be a little bit cheaper than short-term finance. Short-term finance is the sort of realm that bridging finance fits into as well, and they're pretty much both the same thing. But that is usually for a period of less than 12 months. Sometimes it will go for longer than that, but usually a maximum of 18 months.
So why would you use bridging as opposed to development then? It's
usually easier to get. Usually experience isn't considered as much, and that's quite often because the rates are higher. So these lenders, usually short-term finance lenders, are willing to take a bit more risk than what development lenders in the true sense of the word are willing to take.
So technically then you'd go in with bridging perhaps in theory and then replace it with development finance halfway through, or?
Not usually, no. It's quite often the other way around. In that development finance is usually from the start. It probably can work both ways, but it's more about what's available to you given your profile, I suppose. But to give a bit of an idea on rates, usually development finance is somewhere between 7 and 12% per annum, whereas bridging finance is quite often between 1 and 2% per month.
Okay.
Ouch.
Ouch, yes. Aisha, what do you say about it?
I would say just be very cautious about which method of financing you choose and to make sure that it's appropriate for the project. What you don't want to have happen is to be on one sort of finance path and to find out, for example, if you've gone down the bridging route, the loan expires in 12 months, you have to pay it back, but something's gone wrong in your development and you need another 6 months. That's a very, very uncomfortable position to be in.
And presumably they'd be quite ruthless about the rates for extending.
You don't want to be on a loan that's sort of in default, because typically what happens is it does ratchet up, and it ratchets up quite a lot. So you need to be mindful about how long your project is going to take, give yourself a buffer, and get the right debt package in place with the right amount of time as well. Okay,
John.
Where do we start? Goodness me. The first thing I would say is, and Paul's absolutely right here, don't take too big a bite of the cherry. Start off with a small development, learn from that, get it done. Obviously, development finance is the way to go. Make sure it's rolled up. So in other words, the interest is rolled up to the end of the project. It's very important that you're not paying out every month. So roll the interest up to the end. Give yourself plenty of time. Give yourself 2 years, not a year and a half, to get it all paid back.
So in other words, to some extent,
and then there'll be a bullet payment. In other words, every say it's 3 flats. Every time a flat is sold, you can arrange with the funder that they take 80% of every 80% of the funds, or 100% or 90 or 100, depending on what the situation is.
So the loan goes down, it's a diminishing security.
Yeah, exactly.
You're fine.
Yeah.
I mean, would it be sensible in terms of building in time? Would you treat that in the same way that you'd perhaps build in a contingency of, say, 10% on your build costs? Would you take the same view over your finance?
Without question, I'd always add another 6 months on at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Aisha. Sales rates can obviously influence the profitability of a development. Are there any set formulas for calculating the appropriate rate? And I'm presuming they mean that across the country, rates are going to be hugely different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I wish there was a formula. It would make a lot of people's lives very easier. But no, the answer is there isn't a formula, and it will be very much dependent on where you are, what's going on in the local area, and then also importantly, what's going on in the sort of wider market. The way that one could get a good grasp of the sort of sales figures in an area would be to speak to local agents. You need to understand, what is going on at the moment, what has been happening, previously, and then get an idea of what, could potentially happen in the future. But just bear in mind that nobody has a crystal ball, and you need to be prepared that, if you're expecting, something to go up, for example, it may not happen. So typically, look at sold prices rather than sort of for sale.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you the amount of people down here in Canary Wharf who 2 years ago thought the market was going to explode because of Crossrail, and of course that's now been delayed by 2 years. So what that's done to some developers' expectations, I really don't
Exactly.
know.
You can't predict the future. So whilst you may, particularly if you're a developer, you like to be optimistic, but I'd say try and refrain from doing that. Look at prices that have been sold, and to be honest, even, maybe use numbers that are a bit lower to be a bit more cautious and a bit more conservative.
We would always use 5 to 10% less. Yeah.
And Paul, if you were creating a strategy for these people developing, I mean, how would you recommend that they factor in the sales rate?
Yeah, well, just a point on that. I think one thing that a lot of developers do overlook is who they're partnering with for those sales, because the market doesn't necessarily move at one. Some teams and companies are a lot better at sales than others. And so if you're working with a company that has experience in generating significant sales in that area, they're probably likely to do a lot better than if you're doing it yourself, or if you're using an agent that doesn't have that experience. So that's something to consider as well. So far as accounting for what the sales are, I agree, there's no crystal ball. The sales last month can be different to sales this month, and they can stay different. So I suppose just to under account for them.
Yeah, I think what I've seen over the years is, again, you can get an awful sort of variance in sales rates, because perhaps if you take some of these big blocks here, you've got a 70-story block here, 1,000 apartments in one building. sales rate's fantastic, but if you look at the actual sales that are, they're from, the Asia Pacific area. So actually, it's not a true guide as to the true sales rate for the area. So you can quickly get drawn in. So
it just goes back to doing your research.
Yes.
It's just we can't overstate it enough.
Yeah, and as Paul says, some of these companies are very good at marketing, and some are just totally agent reliant, aren't they? I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. John.
Yes.
My local town has a large convenience shop which is hardly used now because of a large Tesco being built just out of town. There are 4 flats above the shop, and I'm sure the shop will close soon, and I want to have the first option on buying it and converting the ground floor into 3 or 4 flats too. Is the conversion of a shop into flats usual, and is it likely to get approval?
Well, likely to get approval is the question there, isn't it?
That's the key, isn't it?
So most local authorities don't like allowing commercial to go to residential. And the reason for that is, one, rates. They get commercial rates. And secondly, employment. But of course, depending where it is in the country, there's a big housing need. So the housing ministers over the last few years, and there's been quite a few of them, have pushed more to allow commercial to go to residential. But it isn't easy, and converting a ground floor flat's a problem. Ground floor shop is a problem because you've only got windows at the front normally, and windows at the back, nothing in the middle. So you've got to be careful. It doesn't lend itself very easily sometimes to be converted. And obviously shop fronts, some councils may say, well, you've got to leave the shop front in. Because of the street scene, it might be in an area of conservation area or something like that. So be careful. I would always look to buy something like that subject to planning permission if I could.
Although I suppose this business of just windows at the front, I mean, mews houses, here in London, mews houses often just have the front aspect, don't they? So
it depends how deep the building is, but it can be an issue, and parking could be another issue. They may say, no, you haven't got enough parking. Yeah. So you have to be very, very careful.
I think the key here was in the question. It was how likely is it to get planning. I think there are quite a lot of things here that could mean that it wouldn't. So you'd need to do a pre-app or have a look first, or get an option agreement on it so you don't buy it first, and only once you have more certainty then proceed.
And again, the local authority duty planner will obviously be helpful to you, and you can have these informal conversations.
You can, and the pre-app is very good now. You get it within 28 days, or should do.
Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, just briefly. So there are a lot more people doing these types of developments now, obviously, with development rights and that sort of thing. The lenders that are willing to lend on them, aren't vast.
Good point.
And that can become a real issue. So that's something, again, that developers overlook. With office buildings and things that are being converted. Sometimes the structures aren't suitable for lending, and sometimes they just look at them and say, that's not a residential building. No,
it looks like a shop.
Exactly. So will people want to live there? That's always a lender's main concern. Is this going to let?
Why is it on some of these blocks, these tall blocks, if they have shops underneath, again, there are certain lenders that won't do it?
Yeah, well, I think the concern there is if a curry house goes in there, no one wants to live above a curry house because it smells of curry. There's things like that. Or is a gym going to go in, is going to be loud? Lenders are always worried about, is this place going to let, and therefore am I going to get my mortgage repayments?
Okay. All right, ladies and gents, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for in this half of the show. Join us again after the break.
Hi, I'm John Howard, and I'm known as the property expert. The reason for this is over the last 40 odd years, I've bought and sold over 3,500 properties, and I'm still going. I'm delighted to pass on my vast experience and knowledge to you through my property seminars that are taking place across the UK this year. To know more, please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you're receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax-efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialize in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
Welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me are Paul Mahoney, Ayesha Ofori and John Howard. Paul, your last question. How does having a number of buy-to-let mortgages affect my credit rating, or are they classed as a separate item from my credit profile?
All right, good question. And it's a bit of it's not a black and white answer in that it's not completely separate, but it also doesn't affect your credit rating the same as a residential mortgage or a personal loan would. So when you submit an application or even when you submit a DIP, the lender will quite often request a copy of your credit report, and that leaves what they call footprints. So another lender that you go to apply with can see that previous lender has done that. If you have many, many footprints, then it looks to lenders like you're applying for many, many mortgages, and they can start to ask questions about that. However, even if you have a bad credit report, depending on what the reason for that is, that doesn't necessarily affect your ability to get a buy-to-let mortgage. Because they're considered commercial mortgages, and the serviceability for those mortgages are more about the rental income from the properties than they are about your own personal income, and also your own ability to service those mortgages because it's not coming from you. It is easier to get a buy-to-let mortgage than it is to get a residential one, for example.
Okay. So if you have, for instance, you're taking out a buy-to-let mortgage, you've got to consider the possibility of having a void.
Yeah.
Is there a set percentage that the lenders tend to build into their calculations to allow for voids?
There is, yeah. So they use all buy-to-let lenders need to use a benchmark rate of 5.5% now. So regardless of what they're lending to you at, they use 5.5%, unless it's a 5-year fixed product. Then they can use the lending rate. But to answer your question, it has to be covered. Have to cover 5.5%, 125% of the time. Now it's a strange way of saying it, but it means that effectively they're saying when you include things like costs and voids, etc., that could account for about 25% of the rent. So yes, that's the way they account for it.
Okay. Aisha, any comments on this?
I'd say just be mindful that sometimes lenders will have a cap on the number of mortgages or buy-to-let mortgages that you can have. So you may be with one lender and you may have, say, 10 buy-to-let mortgages and you want to get an 11th, and they'll say, actually, no, it's not something we're prepared to do. So you'll have to go elsewhere. So I think in answer to the question, you can have multiple buy-to-let mortgages, but sometimes it will depend on who your lender is or who you're speaking to.
I suppose also occasionally you see in these large developments, lenders will say, we've got enough exposure in this building, we're not actually lending on any.
You see a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and lenders are also quite subjective, which is frustrating. because they don't have black and white rules, but they also don't have anyone that really sets the rules or the decisions. So you can't necessarily, it goes back to what we were talking about before, you can't call up the bank manager and say, come on, mate, lend me the money. It's not like that, but they do make subjective calls. So you need to be aware of that as well. It's not necessarily set in black and white.
All right, Aisha, what are the main differences in developing property in London? I know John's going to jump in at me on this one. Right, what's the main difference in developing property in London and the rest of the country, i.e. the more rural areas?
Oh, a lot to consider.
Well, I'd say do one and don't do the other, but there we are. That's just me.
So I guess it also depends on what it is that you're looking for. So, typically people would say that London and the southeast, prices have been higher. So if you're going to do a development, you're looking at developments that would have a sort of larger GDV if you're looking at the same number of units, somewhere else in the UK. But I'd say that, there are benefits for doing things in London and also outside. You need to consider, how much capital do you have? Maybe London and, southeast is stagnating, but other areas of the UK are actually starting to grow. So that might be a better opportunity for you. But if you do look in what I say are rural areas, then you really need to know your market. You really need to know who is your end buyer, for example, because I think it can be a bit less forgiving. If you're in sort of London city centre and you have a development and you haven't done your homework so well, you probably can find a buyer at some level.
Somebody will take you out of the mess, won't they?
Whereas if you're sort of, surrounded by countryside or somewhere just a bit more remote, it could potentially be harder to sell. So you need to, I say, have more certainty.
Right, well, John, on to your last question. Hello, I'm looking for some advice. I've just had an offer accepted on a buy-to-let property. However, the loft has been converted but doesn't have building regulations or planning permission. I understand that I won't be able to let the house out as a 4-bed, as officially it can't be classed as an extra bedroom, and that's fine. Just wondered if there would be any complications with renting it out in general.
I don't think there would be, no. I think you've got to be very careful, because if the attic has been converted without planning permission and building regulation approval, then you definitely need to make sure that it's been done correctly, because if they've cut into the roof or something, it could have structural complications.
Would it come under the new permitted development?
No.
No.
No, it wouldn't. I mean, at the end of the day, you really mustn't let it out because of a fire, probably. I mean, means of escape would be an issue, I would have thought. You can tell people it's storage and that they should use it as storage, and I would actually get them to sign something on the short or tenancy agreement, a note on it, which they sign saying they're only going to use it as storage. Now, whether they then don't do so, you can't really force them, but at least if you get them to sign something, that covers you a little bit, because if there was a fire and there was a loss of life or something, it could be.
Well, I think that's one of those old sort of sayings. Just because you hang a notice round your neck saying so, being a burglar isn't permitted.
No, exactly.
And I think you could get in an awful lot of trouble, couldn't you, if there was a sort of fire situation. And I think essentially any form of building regulations must be adhered to for just general safety.
Absolutely.
For you and your neighbours.
At the end of the day, Stephen, they're there for a reason. They might be annoying sometimes, but they're there for a reason. And certainly I'd be careful, and I'd be even more careful as to why they haven't got that permission.
Yes.
It may be but that they weren't going to be given it, or they haven't looked at the structure properly.
Okay.
So I'd be careful.
Well, look, to our panel of experts, Paul Mahoney, Aisha Ofori and John Howard, thank you all very much for your contribution today.
Pleasure.
Great stuff. Join us again next time on Property TV's Question Time.
If you have any questions that you would like to send to any of our experts at Property Question Time, you can submit them via our website, on social media, or email us at info@propertytelevision.co.uk.
My name is John Howard, and I've been investing and developing properties for over 40 years. In that time, I've been very successful, but of course I've always made the odd mistake as well. In my book, I explain how to be successful and what to do should something go wrong. I've survived 3 property recessions. I can help you do the same. My book is available online. Please go to johnhowardpropertyexpert.co.uk.
The tax system has evolved significantly over recent years for property investors and developers. You may think that you and your accountant have a grip on these changes. However, unless you're receiving specialist tax advice from a specialist tax advisory firm, then it's unlikely to be the case. At ETC Tax, our team of highly experienced chartered tax advisors work with private individuals and companies to deliver effective tax planning whilst meeting HMRC compliance requirements. Let us help you to meet your personal or commercial objectives in the most tax-efficient manner. ETC Tax, making the complex simple.
Property is a great investment option, but it's one of the largest purchases that you'll ever make. As individuals, we're all limited by our resources, and regardless of our experience, knowledge or time, we can achieve much more with the help of a qualified team and extra resources being available. Nova Financial specialize in assisting clients to achieve financial freedom through property investment. With over 100 years of experience, we shape your family's future. To invest in property with absolute confidence, call us on 0203 8600 or visit nova.financial.
Hello, my name's Simon Zucchi. I'm the author of Property Magic, which you can buy on Amazon for $12.99 or indeed get on Audible if you prefer listening to books. Now, I started investing in property in 1995 and I became financially independent by the age of 32, but I made a huge number of mistakes because I learned the hard way. You don't have to do that. I've explained in this book how you can make a huge amount of money investing in property when you know how to do it. And one of the secrets is working with motivated sellers. People for whom the speed and certainty of the sale is more important than the amount of money they get. And we look to find people who've got a problem and come up with an ethical win-win solution. I explain exactly how you do it in here. It's a bestseller. You can buy it online, as I said. However, you can get a complimentary copy. All you have to do is phone the number below or go to the website. I ask you just to pay for the postage, tell us where you want to send it in the UK, and we'll send it completely free of charge to you. Call us right now and we'll send a book to you straight away. Learn how to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.
Meet the Author is a brand new mini-series involving leading experts in the property industry, including mentors, developers, property lawyers, and other industry experts who share insightful stories about their journey and their books. Each book is compiled by authors with years of valuable experience, tips, and observations, providing you with new knowledge about the property industry. To find out more, visit the website property-tv.co.uk/library.